Today's meeting of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee is called to order on September 13th, 2022. Welcome, everyone. Agenda for today's meeting is on the wall at the entrance to chambers, and please remember to turn off your cell phones. To ensure a complete record of the board's action, we ask that each individual wishing to speak clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. This committee is appointed by the City Council annually. Most of us served on this committee last year, but we do have a couple new faces, so I will ask the board members to introduce themselves and identify the fields they each represent. We'll start with you, Carmen.
Carmen Santiago for the people.
Bruce Rector, member of the Community Development Board.
Kathleen Beckman, Clearwater City Council.
Robin Field, Mortgage.
Kevin Schnall, representing the nonprofit industry.
Pierre Cornelier, building contractor and developer.
Pete Scalia, the homeless.
Lindsay Dacus Harrison, real estate.
And I'm your board chair, Camille Hepting. I represent employers in the city of Clearwater. 2.1 is Housing Incentives Program. Amanda Warner, professional planner with Wake Trim, will lead today's discussion. The floor is yours, Amanda.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see most of you. I think I've met before during this process. I think this is the 6th time that we've formed the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee for the Local Housing Incentive Strategies Update for the SHIP program. So welcome, and we appreciate you being here today. I'm going to go into a brief overview of why we're here. You may remember from last year's Local Housing Incentive Strategies Update, you may remember the process, but I'll just give you a refresher on that, and then we'll get into a discussion about where we are today. So, as I mentioned, I think this is the 6th formation of this committee. So, in 2007, it became a requirement of the SHIP program to appoint an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. In 2008, the city established the first one and created the first local.
I'm sorry, it's not there.
Yeah. We're not getting a display on this TV.
Can you all hear me?
Yep, there we go. Thank you, Pat.
Okay. All right, so in 2008, the city established the first Affordable Housing Advisory Committee and the first Local Housing Incentives Strategy Report. And then that happened again 3 years later in 2014, and then again 3 years after that in 2017. In 2020, it became an annual requirement to do this process. So before it was every 3 years, now it's annually, so that's why we're seeing you again so soon. So last year you updated the report. I have provided the 2021 report on everybody's desk this morning. So if you want to refer back to that while I'm talking, please feel free to do that. But most importantly, that'll be part of your homework between this meeting and the next meeting. So the duties of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee are to review the Local Housing Incentive Strategies Report and local government policies. So this includes policies and procedures, ordinances, land development regulations, and a comprehensive plan. And then once you review those, the next duty is to recommend actions or initiatives to City Council. So you can either continue the existing policies or recommendations, or you can add new ones or remove ones if things have been completed. So just know that this is an opportunity to review the report and make any changes at this time. So in terms of meeting requirements, we have to hold these meetings. There's 2 meetings with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee as really discussion or workshop meetings, and then there's a public hearing for adoption of the local housing incentive strategies. All meetings are public meetings. All records are public records for this committee. And then the staff of the City of Clearwater provides the administrative and facility support for these meetings. So this year's schedule is in August 2022, staff met and identified Affordable Housing Advisory Committee members to invite. September 1st, the governing board, which is the City Council, appointed members to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, so that's why you all are here today. We are meeting September through October, so today's meeting is the 1st, the next meeting will be in October, it'll be October 11th. After that, we'll hold a public hearing. So you see November 8th up there. I know Chuck wanted me to bring to your attention that because that's Election Day, we'd like to ask if you all mind moving that to November 7th. Is everybody okay with that date change? November 7th is a Monday. Okay, I'm seeing nods. Okay, all right. So we'll go ahead and do that. So just make a note on your on your handout there that meeting is changed to November 7th, and you'll receive invites and additional notification of that. We're shooting to have the City Council public hearing for this on December 1st. That will be to actually adopt the updated local housing incentive strategies report. And then after that occurs, then we submit it up to the state. And then by the end of March of next year, that would be March of 2023, the city has to incorporate those strategies into the LHAP. So that's what happens next after this. And then ultimately by May 2nd is the deadline for all of that to be submitted together. So the definition of affordable housing, I'm sure most of you are familiar with these terms. There's actually 4 definitions that we look at in the city of Clearwater. One is monthly rents or monthly mortgage payments, including taxes and insurance, must not exceed 30% of median annual gross income for the household. This is what's often referred to as cost burden, so anything over that 30% is considered cost burden. Residential dwelling unit leased or owned by a household with a household income of 120% or less of the adjusted area median family income, so that's what would be considered affordable housing. For rental units, must not exceed rates for annual maximum rents by the number of bedroom unit, as published for the Tampa St. Petersburg Clearwater MSA. And then for non-rental units, the sales price may not exceed 90% of the average area price for the Tampa St. Petersburg Clearwater MSA. So what do those numbers look like? I went through and checked on what the current numbers are for 2022. There were a few numbers that were published for 2023. But for Pinellas County, according to HUD, median family income right now, at least the latest published, which was 2022, is $82,100. So that would be median family income. If you look at what 120% of that is, that's $98,520. So the cost burden threshold, which would be 30% of that, would be approximately $29,500 annually, which equates to about $2,400 monthly. When you look at the average area purchase price for homes, 90% average area purchase price, so let's say for a 3-bedroom unit would be $540,000 approximately. And then the nationwide average purchase price is $368,500. 90% of that is $331,000. So you can see that Clearwater in general is a little bit more costly than the nationwide average purchase prices. Maximum rental limits. Again, this is for the Tampa St. Petersburg Clearwater MSA. We're looking at income categories. If you look at income categories for number of bedrooms, extremely low income, which is 30% of area median income for a 3-bedroom, is $752. That is very low compared to what the actual rental rates are around here. So if you look at these prices, you can see how everything is very very limited. So Pinellas County for 2023, the fair market rent by bedrooms for a 3-bedroom unit is $2,123. So when you look at all this together, we're looking at an affordability crisis basically in the area. So that's what we're trying to tackle through the local housing incentive strategy. So affordable housing agents. So you all are on the supply side of things, so nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, basically facilitating affordable housing, either the production of or perhaps connecting people with affordable housing. The city's role really is to facilitate or regulate that. So how can the city incentivize the production of affordable housing? And then we have clients on the demand side. So how are we connecting the supply with the demand, and then how are we facilitating or regulating the production of units? So the previous 2021 Local Housing Incentive Strategy Report had many of the same components as the previous report. So we start with values, principles, and vision. So this is really the same, setting the framework for what we are considering or looking at. And then the actual strategy, which is the list of incentives and recommendations. So the previous affordable housing values, there were 3 of them. One was to support a dynamic and competitive economy. The second one was to improve social well-being and build a sense of community. And the third one was to ensure that the city's workforce can live within the city. So looking at those three, do any of you have any adjustments or additions or modifications to those housing values? Or are we okay with those moving forward into the next plan cycle? Yes?
I have a suggestion about discussing the value of mixed-income housing and whether or not we really want to, that we value that there are some benefits to society to have mixed-income residents living together. For example, we have the Bluff development with Gotham D'Annunzio, and we have 500 to 600 units potentially coming on the Bluff related to our referendum this fall. And I advocated to have a set-aside of maybe 10% of those units at 120% AMI. And that would mean about, for a single person, about $78,000 a year. So this is professionals living, working for our city, the hospital, and that was defeated on the dais. They didn't want that. And I asked for 5% set aside for 120% AMI. Nope. And part of the rationale was that there was a cost to the city to incentivize that. And I think, Denise, if I remember right, was it like $1 million a year, something like that? And I don't know if it was $1 million a year for 10, 500,000 for 5. But anyway, there was a financial cost to subsidize workforce, I would say professional workforce housing in that development with the value of mixed income housing. And the rationale was you can take that 500,000 or $1 million a year and put it in North Greenwood or Lake Bellevue or some other part of the city and get more bang for your buck, which I understand. But I think that we need to have a discussion about the value of having people of mixed incomes living together and whether or not that needs to be part of our value statement. And how do we want to communicate that if we agree to the council? I think it's worthy of a discussion.
Can I comment on that? If I'm reading this correctly, the definition of affordable housing a couple of years back, if you take two Pinellas County school teachers that are married and have 2 children, and they've been teachers for 10 years, they can't afford to live in Pinellas County. Period. That's just a cold, hard fact, right? Isn't that what you're talking about? I think there seems to be if it's unaffordable housing is only for people who are in poverty, and that's not true. That's a whole separate issue we have to deal with, and we deal with every month. But we're talking about people who are, correct me when I'm wrong here, teachers, policemen, nurses, people who are office workers. They can't afford to live in Pinellas County. And so you want to put more units in, but then when the term comes up, well, it's affordable housing, it suddenly gets shot down, and that comes from NIMBY. Nobody wants it in their backyard. Nobody ever wants to solve the problem. Oh, no, everybody wants to solve the problem. Nobody ever really wants it near them. And that's something, to your point, Kathleen, that has to be addressed. And it has to, almost like you got to rip the Band-Aid off and start talking about this. Because until we find a way to help everyone across the board, we're not going to help anyone. I'm off my soapbox.
So can we talk about whether or not we value mixed income housing and whether we think the city should subsidize it in some way?
I think so.
And everywhere, because part of the pushback was not there. That's a view, that's deluxe, that doesn't belong there. And I think it needs to be everywhere. There are cities across the nation that require it everywhere, that they build housing in their communities, regardless if it's waterfront or, Mountain View or whatever. So I think it's worthy of a discussion.
I think it's a discussion you have to pull a county into as well. Because
Well, I mean, we're here to send a message. We need to send
I understand,
a
but
message.
I hate to say it, there's limited space in our area, but there's space in the county that needs to, we need to start looking at this, say, how do we solve this?
So if we're speaking specifically to the values of affordable housing, which is what we're doing on this slide right here, I think the note that we want to add is what affordable housing brings. So we have to turn it in a way that we're not just adding, there's value to mixed income housing, because that wouldn't really fit in this particular slide here, but it would be something along the lines of, connects different socioeconomic backgrounds in a, in a mixed income type community or something along those lines.
I want to see, though, it fits into the values that are here, ensures the city workforce can live within the city. I get outright stating it, but a lot of these values kind of hit that if they're done correctly.
I wonder if it's the right place to add it.
Yeah, let me make a suggestion. So, in addition to the values, the next slide, I believe, is principles. So we may want to, so the values are more of the aspirational goal. So this is what we want to work toward or move toward. The principles are, how do we get there? A little more detailed in terms of how we get there. So I'm wondering if the principles is the more appropriate place to add some of that more specific targeted language for mixed income housing. So let's look at these. So we have on affordable housing principles, the current ones are affordable over the long term. So that ensures that the affordability continues into the future. Diverse supply that provides for a mix of income levels and the diverse needs of residents. So looking at that particular principle, there may be more to add to that where we say mix of income levels. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're in the same place together. So maybe there's an opportunity to revise this particular principle to clarify that we're encouraging that mix of income levels together in that same place or the same development. Let's look at some of the others. So sustainable, well-designed, and minimizes physical barriers to accessibility, in character with the surrounding neighborhood. And then we have strategically located, which really refers to pedestrian-oriented, access to mass transit, open space, educational institutions, and employment or workforce training opportunities. So when I look at all of those principles, I'm seeing that number 2 may be the place to talk about how we can integrate that. So looking at number 2, are there any suggestions for how to revise that language?
Let's say maybe that supply that provides for a mixed income level at every housing development, at all housing developments, that's what we value and want to incentivize.
Maybe way too specific about 120%.
Right.
About the income level at 120% or lower. Well,
But that is the definition of
Yeah.
affordable housing.
Yeah.
and
Right.
do you think it should be lower, Gabby?
Well, I mean, it's always between 30 and 120%.
Right.
The reality is it's almost impossible to serve those in the 20%
Yeah.
AMI. So, I mean, it has to be heavily subsidized, to
For those,
facilitate that.
Right. So Gina is bringing up a point that may be a little bit nuanced. So affordable housing projects are limited to 80% and below, so I don't wish to inadvertently establish a mixed income level that includes market rate and
So in terms of is that in terms of how it's codified in the land development code, in terms of the definition? For the 80%, because I know SHIP looks at affordability a little bit differently than this.
I just want to make sure we're not going to include some 100% projects if
Yeah.
binding requires that. So
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, okay.
Then
So
maybe
how might it be phrased then?
the easiest might be to just add after income level, so for a mix of income levels within the same development or something along that line, so that it's not, without having to mention the percentage, right?
Or just within development. Or supply that provides for a mix of income levels within developments and the diverse needs of residents.
And when you say within developments, that means all developments, right? So we don't have to say all.
Well, is it working to do with all, are we setting the tone that this is all developments? Or are we?
And the consequence, I guess, is you could be, to Gina's point, you could be almost arguing that you need to insert market rate housing into what would otherwise be 100% affordable housing
Right.
projects.
I don't see how that happens. that you'd be inserting market rate into affordable housing developments? Where does that say? Oh, because,
No, well, that would be the implication of trying to say that we encourage mixed income projects.
so mixed income meaning market rate as well as, instead of all just
So they could,
30, 60, 120.
which of course would be attractive probably to a developer.
Would you have suggestions on how to word that so that?
I think
Sure.
so what I'm hearing so far is diverse supply that provides for a mix of income levels within the same development and the diverse needs of residents. So diverse supply that provides for a mix of income levels within the same development, and I would say probably add and provides for the diverse needs of residents. Does that sound like it gets us to where we want to go without specifically calling out a percentage or? Okay, we'll add that.
But then does that tie, you know, an affordable housing subdivision to have market rate homes?
Right.
That's the issue, right, that
Right.
Jane is talking about. You know, say that we're building 30 homes now, all of a sudden, it's not affordable anymore because a percentage has to be market rate.
I think we're still saying a mix of income levels, so it's not really, it's still open-ended to the point where it's not saying it has to be all market rate, it has to be all affordable, it could be a mix of affordable and market rate, it could be a mix of different affordable levels, in terms of 50%, 80%, 120%. So I don't think we're specifically calling out what that mix is, just that we're providing for a mix of that.
Right, and if the financials, like from the state, require it to be all affordable, then we still have the diversity, and we can just say, look, we don't have the flexibility here to have market rate. But I think it is good to have market rate. I mean, if we really believe in mixed income housing, we want some market rate as well, wherever we're gonna build. You know, unless it's precluded by, it needs to be affordable in 30, 60, 120, whatever. So I don't have a problem.
And I agree with you, I mean, there's a big benefit about having the mixed income. The problem here is there's not enough affordable housing already as it is.
Right.
In order for, you know, for that mixed income on the opposite side.
Right.
So.
Right. But you know, like with your habitat communities and homes, I mean, you have market rate in there, and it's all, works, it works.
Yeah, it does work, you know, we're trying to squeeze every
I
piece
know.
of land that we can get, so.
Okay, so my question is, just to go back to that, because we're specifically on this edition talking about the developments that are not specifically affordable housing developments, is this still the right place to put what we're talking about? Because this is talking specifically about affordable housing developments. So are we limiting ourselves by just adding it to this list because we're already talking about mixed income within the 30 to 120? Do we want to be careful in where we place it so that it's a clear message that we're sending to say, outside of the affordable housing developments, the way that they already sit and they already are working, we would like the city to consider basically including affordable housing in all developments that are being considered?
Well, that might go with the values, the slide before,
Right.
but doesn't this one, this is part of our whole city values, that the slide you just moved. I mean, I don't know that it's just for affordable housing, Camille. Isn't it just what we value in housing, or is it just?
I think this is all of the things that we want affordable housing to be.
Yeah.
But I think this limits us to just the affordable housing developments. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this
No,
is.
you're correct. So this particular, so everything we're dealing with in the whole local housing incentive strategy report is all affordable housing. So what we're doing is we're creating values for affordable housing, principles for affordable housing, a vision for affordable housing, and then creating recommendations of specific actions to get there. So yes, it does all fall under the umbrella of affordable housing.
Okay.
So going back to the values slide, so affordable housing, how does this benefit the city? It supports a dynamic and competitive economy, it improves social well-being and builds a sense of community. This is how affordable housing supports the city of Clearwater, ensures that the city's workforce can live within the city. So that's the overall, what does affordable housing bring to the city of Clearwater? Why do we want to promote it? So that's what the values slide is. When you get back to the principles slide, now you're narrowing down a little bit further to what we want affordable housing to look like. And so, yes, this is number 2 would be narrowed down to affordable housing. I think there's other places where we could talk a little bit about those market rate, incorporation of market rate into the affordable housing menu in terms of getting projects off the ground. We can do that down in the recommendations section as well. I'd have to go through and see which specific recommendation could be tailored to add that in. But I think here for the affordable housing principles, I think it does benefit you to reference that you want that in the same development, because I don't think it's going to be captured anywhere other than a specific recommendation at this level, at the value principles and vision level. If we go to the vision that we currently have, which is a very long sentence, I'm going to say that. The affordable housing vision that was established last year, and I think there were some minor adjustments to it. The City of Clearwater will encourage the development of a diverse supply of housing that is safe, affordable, sustainable, and well-designed, that blends into the character of all the city's neighborhoods, proximate to public amenities and employment opportunities, which supports an inclusive community and the diverse needs of residents. So we don't specifically call out mix of incomes here. I think we allude to it in the inclusive aspect, the diverse needs of residents, but it's not specifically called out in the vision either. So I think probably incorporating it into the principles under number 2, we'll go ahead and do that. In terms of the vision, you may also want to adjust this a little bit to be more specific about it. But then you also have the opportunity down in the recommendations to add a specific action that will point to that as well.
Do we think there's merit to adding a principle that specifically talks about it so that we can keep our principles the way that they are and the way that we had them, decided them last year, and just include something that's specifically for that purpose? So that, because at the end of the day, we don't disagree with number 2. I think number 2 needs to stay there, and it might get a little complicated if we try to make that into, one more aspect. Maybe we create a number 6, if that's even possible. I don't know if we're limited to the number, but where we specifically address that we would like the city to consider affordable housing in all developments that are basically being brought online, right?
Yeah, and incorporate non-affordable housing. I mean, incorporate affordable housing into non-affordable housing
Right.
projects.
Right.
So, as a principle.
Yeah,
And
all
maybe
of them.
we set up
Yeah.
a set-
Is it possible, I'm sorry,
sorry.
is it possible that somehow, if you're talking originally about maybe $1 million being set aside to help subsidize some of this, is it possible that we have to look at this, or we have to bring this to the city council and say, look, when a developer comes to you and wants to develop, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 homes, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's a free market. If he could sell them, he's got a right to do that, and people want to buy them, they want to live there. At the same time of this 24-acre project that's come before us, can we set aside, or can we have the developer take 5 acres and make that be not $600,000 homes, but be $200,000 townhouses that are architecturally designed into the plan, so that what you've accomplished is, he's making money, and we've got the subsidy to help him out a little bit, but also, guess what? School teachers can live in Pinellas County who work here. I mean, why is that so hard to get to? And can we at least get to the recommendations point? We recommend that to the city council. Because to me, that's one of those things that could actually be a solution to the problem, rather than we just keep talking around it.
And I think we'll get to that when we get to the recommendation portion, but I think to your point, Amanda, we can't recommend without also including it into the principles, so that then it makes sense when we get to the recommendation that it says, okay, that's why they're recommending this particular. And I don't know that we can be as specific to say, there's a specific percentage of every single development that has to be, whatever it may be, but.
I don't know what it has to be. It just has to
Right.
be acknowledged that that's something that a developer comes
Right.
before the board, they're going to be asked to present that.
Right. So maybe in order to accomplish that, we add a 6th principle along the lines of incorporated into, a majority.
How did you phrase that, Gabby?
Incorporate affordable housing into any or all non-affordable housing projects
Right.
in the city.
And because of how it's written here, it would say incorporated into all developments,
All housing.
all
developments.
housing developments whenever possible or applicable, or, whatever the disclaimer needs to be.
I have a small comment about number 3. The sustainable, well-designed, and minimizes physical barriers to accessibility. I think our housing principles also need to include, with the goal of reducing rental costs or housing costs, and that means, more energy efficient everything. Appliances, it means incentivizing developers to have solar and EV chargers and all those things that are going to lower the cost of for the residents. So, and we also have green print that speaks to lowering the cost of 1,000 low and moderate income residents here in Clearwater. So I think we need to take into account some of those guiding documents.
I agree. I think well-designed is a little bit of a wide statement. We should probably change it so that maybe it says designed for, and then sustainability,
Maximum
cost efficiency,
energy
whatever
efficiency.
those, whatever those that you just mentioned.
Okay. So on number 3, so on number 2, just to recap, we're going to add a 6th principle at
Right.
the bottom, to incorporate affordable housing into all non-affordable housing development. And then we are going to modify number 3 to basically rearrange it. We'll say designed for sustainable, I'll say energy efficient.
Maximum energy efficiency.
Maximum energy efficiency.
And
to
cost
minimize
efficiency,
physical
right,
barriers.
in general, cost efficiency in general, I think.
Okay. Maximize energy and cost efficiency. And I'll reword it grammatically, but it'll end with the minimizes physical barriers to accessibility, so we don't lose that part.
There's a factor that I think about too with housing, both in apartments and in single family like Gabby's, is that planning for the future where automobile manufacturers are not going to be manufacturing combustible engines and EVs are the future, and making sure that these buildings that are being built, single family or otherwise, are ready for these people to utilize what's coming around the corner in 10 years. And so that's incorporated in the building right now where it's lowest cost, rather than assessing these people 10 years down the line or asking the city to subsidize that larger expense 10 years in the future. So that needs to be here at the front end. So, I mean, again, I don't know how you want to phrase it, but looking to the future,
Yeah, maybe that can still be part of number 3, designed as part of the design statement, where it says designed for, technology advancements or whatever.
Yeah.
To anticipate,
Yeah.
technology advancements.
Green initiatives or something like that.
because all these things are a fight every time, we have something that comes before the council. And we need to be able to have a document, if this is what we care about, to hold up and say, this is what you all have recommended, and these are best practices, and please take these into account when you're awarding contracts.
So for the developers in the room, I haven't heard anything from either one of you. How would this impact cost of development? Would it be a barrier inadvertently?
It always is. Anything that is added into affordable housing, who's actually putting up the cost of that addition, And we all obviously strive for making, an energy efficient home, and having that homes are energy efficient, we cannot install solar, it's out of our reach,
Right.
Especially in today's market. So we're always looking for sponsors, and, we're trying to get there, but it's impossible. So this, number 3 doesn't specifically say that it has to be installed solar, but it has to be sustainable, which, look out for the future. And, you know, to Beckman's point, it's cheaper to add it, you know, before than later. It is an expense, you know. It was a year ago, and we couldn't add it into our homes. So I imagine that it's even more nowadays, but, you know, if there's subsidies for it, you know, that would be great. And I think we had a system of points that, you know, depending on what we can add to the homes, make it work.
But I think by saying that we value it, we can hold it up and say, this is what we value, and then ask the city to help subsidize it. I mean, I'm not expecting developers to absorb everything, right? But it's just, we have to be able to say that these are our beliefs in order to ask for money from the coffers. And we got to have it written down, that those
When
are.
so we just need to your point, Denise, we just need to make sure that none of the language that we're adding is going to become something that prevents, you know, development. It's a guideline, it's a principle, to your point, Kathleen, it's something that we value, but it's not all a requirement, because not all of it can be a requirement, unfortunately, until we get to that point.
So in terms of coming up with a general, just thinking about the principles here and any language that's being added, in terms of general language that's not going to pin a particular developer down on a particular thing, like you must install solar panels at the beginning, do we want to use the term energy efficient? I heard technological advancements. I guess I'm seeking from the committee some direction on what's that encompassing language that would cover that value and that principle, but then also not become a barrier when you get down to the actual development application stage. Any thoughts on that, on what you feel?
Energy efficient will definitely cover everything.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the insulation, you know, the windows, and the Energy Star appliances, so it covers the EV station, so.
Any decision, I think you said more lowers the cost, so. like,
Yeah, I
any
think cost
decision that lowers the cost
efficiency,
of-
yeah. Cost efficiency
Of
makes
living.
sense to include it because we're talking about affordable housing. We're talking about, let's not add a cost to somebody's, you know, monthly bill if we don't have to. So maybe energy and cost efficient or something along those lines.
And really, even the strategically located near mass transit really is an option to
Right.
reduce cost as well.
Right.
So it's part of all of that.
Right, to y'all's point, I just want to be cautious that we don't inadvertently interrupt the supply and production of homes by making it difficult for developers or contractors to integrate these in there. So, you know, it's a fine balance, as you all know. So, you know, I think if the principle is, as you say, you know, if we use energy efficient and things like those, I think we can get deeper into the strategies where we can identify those things very specifically, that those are strategies that we'll explore, maybe we'll require developers to evaluate the feasibility of these things when, you know, making requests of the city, those kinds of things, but I would just caution you to kind of think through, we don't want to inadvertently create hurdles for developers that they're not able to overcome, or that we cannot help them overcome with our limited dollars.
Okay. All right. So it looks like we have some revision to number 3. So we'll add in that language regarding energy and cost efficiency, but keeping it broad. And then we'll add a 6th principle regarding the integration of affordable housing into non-affordable housing developments. With that, any other comments on the principles specifically? Okay. All right.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Number 4, it says in character with the surrounding neighborhood. That is very broad.
Yeah.
And it could also limit, you know, the houses, right? Depending on the neighborhood that the project is located. So what exactly does that mean?
So I think that's up for discussion on what that could mean or does mean. So I think just looking back on past years for the discussions with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, I think this was more of an attempt to how do I want to phrase this, to ameliorate or mitigate some of the concerns with affordable housing
Yeah.
coming into a neighborhood, concerns about, how that'll look. Will it be incompatible in terms of its appearance with adjacent homes? I think that was where this stemmed from initially, but it's certainly up for discussion on whether this should be further flushed out or added to or adjusted at this point. But I think it had more to do with compatibility and avoiding some of that NIMBY reaction to affordable housing.
That's what it was.
People hear that affordable housing project.
It was our way, I think last year when we added it, to basically say, that it doesn't have to look like, you know what I mean? Like some of the comments that I think we brought up were, that by putting this in there, we would create more of a, kind of like a, what's the word I'm looking for? We're not asking anybody to make it look exactly like the house next door, but so that we can say it needs to fit in the neighborhood, to say it's not gonna look like affordable housing if you don't know that it is affordable housing, if that makes sense. The way that, like, right, the way that yeah.
Good for anybody,
Right.
and the people that live in the home
Right.
want to look like their home matches the neighborhood.
I understand exactly what it means, but that limits, the creativity and the design of any affordable housing project, So if we're talking about tiny homes, additional structures, that limits it, because if the neighborhood does not have that surrounding character, then we cannot come in with an alternative, something that is sustainable, well-designed, and
Yeah, that's a good point.
energy and cost efficient. So this limits that, because as soon as you tell me that, I have to go into a neighborhood and create a house that looks like the one next door.
Right.
So-
That's a good point. I don't think we thought of that way when we talked about it last year.
Was character more like, I'm thinking the aesthetics of the home, the
Right.
paint colors, things like that, shutters on the home compared to not. I wasn't thinking in general it being a single family or a townhome or something like that. I think it's just fitting with the aesthetics of the neighborhood. If you go into a neighborhood with all the bungalow type homes, I know Habitat makes a lot of their homes, even that are block homes, look similar to bungalow style homes. I was thinking more style when you say character, not the actual type of home. But
Yeah, if you go into the vision, which is the following slide, we have the way that we said it there was blends into the character of of all the city's neighborhood. But I think there's a point here, and I think it's important that we make a change to that particular bullet point in the principles, because we obviously don't want it to become a barrier. If anything, maybe you should say that brings value to you know what I mean? Like maybe there's another way to.
Maybe it speaks to the, diversity of housing choices and options. So you can have ADUs, you can have tiny homes. So we do value different housing options.
Right.
And I think aesthetically, they have to fit in with a community, but I want as much creativity as possible. Triplexes, duplexes, even like rooming homes.
Right.
All sorts of,
Right.
we need every option available in the city.
Do you have a recommendation, Gabby, for this particular aspect?
Yeah, I don't know, I didn't think. Something that maybe just promotes,
How about-
affordable housing that promotes the values and principles, of a sustainable, cost-efficient, and energy-design home. But, I don't know exactly how, or just remove the entire number 4.
Yeah.
Because to your point, I understand what you're saying about, blending in, but at the same time, blending in limits that affordable housing, because they want to create something.
Gina's got her.
Yeah.
I would just say that I think you might want to separate uses, which would be your ADUs, your duplexes, triplexes, and offer character. I think that when we look at character, we're going to think about, does it fit in roof line similarity, perhaps porches, you know, if it's a neighborhood with porches, like right now, we have a project that has come in for a metal house that looks essentially like a barn with no windows next to a whole bunch of cottages and bungalows. I mean, that is not, yes, it probably costs 30% less, but how does that really impact the property around it? So I think that's what we would be thinking of at character, that it fits in with those kind of key elements, that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb, if you will. So,
In that example, how does that house impact the neighborhood homes? Does it impact it negatively?
I would say it does.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
if it looks like it belongs out in the middle of the country, you know, compared to in a very urban environment, I think that could have some impacts on the surrounding properties. So anyway, I would just encourage you to think about those things like architecturally, that it, you know, kind of blends in. It doesn't, I wouldn't look at it about, you know, duplexes, because there are a lot of communities, well, not a lot, but there is definitely a trend. Minneapolis started it. It's happening on the West Coast where they've eliminated single-family zoning, and you can have up to 4 units. And, you know, compatibility can be had even though you're having multiple units. You can design something that will fit in.
The use is very different from character.
Right.
I would
Yeah.
say, yeah.
But character, I mean, that's the argument with, you know, Edgewater Point, Clearwater Point, character and roof lines and things that there are
Yeah, I think that's
exceptions.
a very different situation. You had a tourist zoning district
Yeah.
adjacent to an LMDR. So I think, you know, if you're looking at different residential districts, you know, that's kind of comparing apples to oranges.
But that brings up a good point, Gabby, because we were just talking about how we need to be careful and how we word principle number 3 so that we don't basically, you know, minimize the number of people that will want to develop affordable housing. But we're doing the same thing with number 4 as it sits. And should we, I mean, I think this entire committee would agree that we would rather have affordable housing, even if it looks different than the rest of the neighborhood, than not have it at all. So maybe that's a conversation worth having. Because if we might not be in agreement with number 4 anymore, and if that's the case, we just need to make sure that whatever we put down reflects that. Because if we say it absolutely has to look like the rest of the neighborhood, at what cost are we, you know, are we putting that principle out there? Do we prefer to include something along the lines of the creativity that you mentioned? Maybe creative in the use of, you know, the land and the size of the units, the number of the units, all of those things can come into play. And that would be more of an open-ended opportunity than closing a door because it doesn't fit in a specific neighborhood. I don't know what this committee thinks, but I think this is the conversation we're having right now.
I think, and even on a couple others we've already spoken to, I think it's written broadly for a reason, and why we've had this conversation on what character really means, that this isn't intended to, it's really intended to encourage affordable housing, that in many neighborhoods, as we've already discussed, there's going to be a not in my backyard mentality with regard to an affordable housing project going in a neighborhood. So this to me is written broadly for a reason, and simply to just maybe lessen the fears and concerns of those neighborhoods where an affordable housing project might be proposed, that we're showing respect for those homeowners in that neighborhood who have been there for decades probably and love their neighborhood. We're trying to encourage throughout the city neighborhood activism and people taking pride in their neighborhood. So to me, it's written broadly for a reason, and it's just simply a show of respect to those neighborhoods who have been and the citizens have been in those neighborhoods for a long time. That we're not going to propose an affordable housing project that sticks out like a thumb, like it's been said earlier.
I think on the flip side, I was just going to say on the flip side to that point, I think it's also for the people that are living in the affordable housing home. You want to be a part of that neighborhood. You want your home to look like a part of your neighborhood. You don't want your home to stand out when your children go out to play with other neighborhood kids and they know they're from the affordable housing home and they're not. So that's where I think the sore thumb sticks out a little bit more. You don't want to get the stigma that that's the affordable housing. It's not really a part of our neighborhood. So we're trying to blend a neighborhood and have it have the character. And I agree. I think 4's what we want on there. I don't see a change to it because I think it's broad, it's character, it's not use. It's really just the aesthetics. You want to give the general aesthetics. I don't think it's causing a barrier for affordable housing into a neighborhood.
I respect your opinion in regards to, the neighborhood characteristics. Affordable housing doesn't have to be bad. In my opinion, what we build, which we're one of the few and largest affordable housing in the county, our houses don't look bad at all. In fact, they look much better than almost every neighborhood that we build our homes. And to the point that, respect of those neighbors that have lived there 10, 20 years ago, those neighbors are able to live there 10, 20 years ago because housing and land was affordable at that point. You put the same people that live already in that neighborhood to buy a new home in that neighborhood and they cannot afford it. So it's just, I think that point limits, and we're talking about not uses, we're talking about character. It limits affordable housing. We built a home in West Pasco that the house had to be in character with its surrounding neighborhood, and we ended up building a 2-bedroom home with 1.5 bathroom, with 2-car garage, because that's what the neighborhood looked like. Our house looked better than any other house, but it was a waste of, affordable housing space, just because they needed to be, in contact.
In line almost, yeah.
Like blend in, and we could have built, a beautiful home without having to be exactly like the surrounding homes. So I think that point is definitely limited. Affordable housing doesn't have to be bad or cheap. And again, to the point, we're talking about the people that serve this community, the teachers, the firefighters, the policemen, the nurses, what's wrong with those people, right? What's wrong with all of us working, office staff? So, we keep saying like, affordable housing is a sore thumb, but, that's us, right? That's our people.
Right.
So I feel like, why, and that's one of the problems, people like, nobody wants it. It doesn't matter if the house looks better than the surrounding homes or neighborhood. Nobody wants it in their neighborhood, period. So we have to, cut that stigma and bridge that gap and say, no, the houses can be anywhere because these people are everywhere serving our community and paying taxes like anybody else. So
I think that what we all agree on is that it brings value to the neighborhood. And I think that's the way that we need to write it, because to your point, Gabby, it's not about the character. It's not about, really, at the end of the day, you're absolutely correct in saying the person that lives right next to the Habitat home just happened to have bought the house when it was worth $30,000, not $300,000. So I think if we flip the writing on number 4 and just say brings value to the neighborhood that it's in, whether it's from character, whether it's from the creativity of whatever the
praise value.
right. I think that's what we all want this to mean, is that it's affordable housing is supposed to bring value not just to the people that are living in it, but to the entire neighborhood that it goes into, because it brings value. It does. It's a fact. It does.
So value can refer to your personal values, certainly can refer to money. So as you think about affordable housing in all development types, and this may be a question for you, Lindsay, would appraisers devalue a neighborhood financially from an assessment or appraised value if homes within there are affordable?
No, there's not something that an appraiser will do, but I would talk about, there's a difference between an appraised value and then a buyer's market value.
Right.
Okay.
So, and I go back to nothing with affordable housing, because I think most of the Habitat homes do look good. I go back to the barn house going up, metal barn house going up with all of the other homes not meeting that character. So that's what I'm just seeing from a real estate perspective. So do you want the home that stands out like that? The two, the surrounding neighbors, yeah, can that devalue their property value? Yes, in a buyer's mind, for sure. So you're gonna shrink your buyer pool, so you're not gonna get the price you might want for your property because they don't wanna live next to an eyesore or something like that. Not anything to do with affordable housing being an eyesore. So that's what I go back, it's not the affordable house, it's just not making the affordable house not that, how the other homes in the neighborhood look.
No, but the city takes care of that, right? When
Yeah.
the permit goes through a process.
Isn't that what code, I mean, is that what we're talking about, something that wouldn't?
And they, we've had comments back and forth, right, that says, do these, put stucco on all sides of the house, or, we want to put only stucco on the front, for example. So the city takes care of that look of that house.
Yeah.
Because it has to be presented, for approval.
Well, that might be the difference between,
At that point.
that might be the difference between how Pasco defines character and how perhaps the city does. I don't know.
If it's a project that just goes straight to building permit, like a single-family home might, depending on the lot size and a lot of issues, we wouldn't do that kind of review. But if it goes through, a flexible standard process or flexible development, then we would. But chances of us getting into deep, kind of architectural issues at a building permit would be more limited.
So bringing in value in here, I think what you were kind of
Just-
asking or alluding at, how do we determine that that's adding value? We can say appraisal value, we can say market value, but some of those are subjective
Right,
to
right.
whatever it is. So I get sometimes these categories have to be broad so we don't limit ourselves. We
Right.
can't get the affordable housing in because someone says it's not adding value. How do we determine what that value is?
That's my concern.
Yeah, that's where I would say, adding anything that says value, I feel like we've now created a hurdle.
But I also think that we have discussed that in character with the surrounding neighborhood is problematic because of everything that we've discussed. I think maybe there's a way, and we don't have to find a solution today, but I think maybe there's a way to describe what we're meaning to describe differently than the way it's currently being described.
I've heard several people mention aesthetics specifically, and I know this goes back to, maybe the use was limited before by having to describe that character, and it feeds into what Gina was saying as well. Do we mean specifically aesthetic character, since that isn't necessarily always reviewed, depending on the level of review? Do we want to limit it just to the aesthetic character blending in with the surrounding neighborhood rather than having it be broad character, which could refer to the unit type fitting into the neighborhood or the configuration fitting into the neighborhood, which I think is the large part of the limiting factor on an affordable housing developer coming in. Aesthetic character could be, just some minor tweaks to the outside exterior to make it blend in. So, what are your thoughts on maybe narrowing it down to aesthetic character, and then maybe that kind of closes the door on some of the other undefined aspects of character that I think we're struggling with?
We can say something along the line aesthetically pleasing. We can say something like with an identified architectural style, which already limits that block house, like, a box without a porch or something like that. So once you have to do that, you have to define what am I building in here. So that can be what we add instead of, in character with the surrounding neighborhood.
I think if you do in aesthetic character with the surrounding neighborhood, to me, that's touching on all the points we want because it literally is just the aesthetics. We're not talking about building use. We're not giving the illusion that we can't have a small home. We just want that small home to look
nice.
similar to the other homes in the neighborhood and not, blend.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought it might be useful to know that in our affordable housing bonus section of the code, we actually do have criteria about standards, and this is geared to attached dwellings, but there's compatibility criteria. The project shall be consistent with any sort of special area plans. Proportionality and scale of the proposed development shall be consistent with the community character. So that is what we're looking at. The overall aesthetics of the approved development shall be compatible with or an improvement to the community character. The scale and coverage of the proposed development shall be compatible with adjacent properties. And there's some graphics, unfortunately, I can't get them to show on my screen here that I could put up here. But it shows you like what we mean by that, you know, in a graphic format. So you could have a two-story house next to a single-story house. It doesn't preclude you from doing that or attach. So anyway, we already have a list of these things already in the code, and we could provide that to you for your next meeting if you're interested.
I like the verbiage of what you read, where you say it has to be compatible or an improvement. And that, I think that's what I meant when I brought up value. I didn't mean, obviously, property value. That's what it is. Aesthetically, it either fits in or looks even better, is what we're basically saying, right?
Again, a judgment though,
True.
I mean, somebody's judgment, which
Right.
is fine.
Right.
I
But
think,
it's already in the code.
right,
So
Yeah.
whatever
Right.
we write here
yep,
just needs to
redundant.
be similar, you know,
Right.
repeat with
Yeah.
the code.
But I do think that we're bringing that up because right now it just says it has to blend in. Whereas the code actually says it either has to blend in or look better, or, you know, this is my words, but, and I think that makes sense to add that into this particular area since we're discussing this, because to your point, Gabby, we're not asking the house to look the same. Sometimes, and a lot of the times, they look a lot better. So that's what we're bringing up.
So improvement in character or with the, I mean, it's tough.
I don't remember, I liked what Gina was reading from I think, Affordable Housing Code, which said comply with or improve.
And this is for bonuses, so if you're going
Okay.
to exceed the allowable
Okay.
density. And there's some sustainability features on
that's right.
green building criteria as
Comply
part
with.
of that. Let's see, it's hard, I'm only getting half a page here. on
Madam
the
Chair,
screen.
I might suggest we circulate this.
Yeah.
And then we talk about it at the next meeting.
We can do that.
We can send you this so you
That
can
would be
see
great.
what we have for the bonus.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so with the principals, it looks like number 4, we'll hold that one. We know there's going to be a change to it. After Gina provides that section, we'll look at it at the next meeting and then further refine that number 4 principle as well. So with that, any other comments on the principles moving forward? All right, so now to the vision. So really the vision statement blends or combines the principles into one overarching statement. And again, City of Clearwater will encourage the development of a diverse supply of housing that is safe, affordable, sustainable, and well-designed, that blends into the character of all the city's neighborhoods, proximate to public amenities and employment opportunities, which supports an inclusive community and the diverse needs of residents. Any adjustments to the vision or based on some of the conversation regarding the principles, maybe some adjustments to reflect whatever comes out of it.
Right, I think we may have to table that until we have the principles
The principles
squared away, and then
refined.
we'll be able to
All right.
talk about that.
Does everyone agree on tabling that to the next meeting, so we have the principles refined? Okay,
Yes.
all right. So affordable housing strategies. So now we're getting into the specific strategies or recommendations of the local housing incentive strategy report. So as we all know, there are barriers to affordable housing and there are incentives to affordable housing. Sometimes things that look like barriers can become incentives. Sometimes incentives that we think will work as incentives turn out to be barriers. So I want to point out that it's often a balancing act between what's a barrier and what's an incentive. Barriers in general, we know that these barriers typically come up with affordable housing, supplier expertise, cost of production, land availability, infrastructure capacity, information access. Are developers aware of what incentives are out there, codes and regulations, the process, specifically the permitting process, financing, and public perception. There's also many other barriers to affordable housing, but these are just a few that come up quite frequently. So under Florida statute under the SHIP program, the incentive areas that we are required to look at under the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee are expedited review process, the modification of fees, flexible densities, infrastructure capacity, accessory dwelling units, parking reductions, flexible lot configurations, modifications of street requirements, pre-adoption policy consideration, an inventory of public lands, and proximity to transportation, employment, and mixed-use development. So these 11 incentive areas are the ones that we are required to review by statute and determine whether or not the City of Clearwater is furthering these specific incentive areas. And so that is what constitutes the bulk of the LHIS, or Local Housing Incentive Strategy Report. Additionally, in previous years, the AHAC has identified other incentives that they want to put forward. So at the 2021 AHAC initiated incentives, those included the following, which were continued from previous years. Looking back, these are ones that have been continued, I think, throughout the duration of this committee's formation. Adaptive reuse, land development code, communication and marketing of affordable housing, financing, and partnerships. So those are ones that are not required by statute, but are added as things that the City of Clearwater would like to forward. So the first part of the report is to create an inventory of the best practices or incentives to provide affordable housing. So we are actually in the process of doing this. We're going back and looking at what was done during the last cycle in 2021 and then the progress to date. So that is currently in process. However, we want to talk today just a little bit about what you see are some of the barriers and what are the incentives that you want to focus on for the actions or recommendations of this plan. So I know we've talked a lot about the values and the principles and getting into the vision, but this is really what are the specific actions that you feel need to happen in the future and be documented in this particular plan this year. So I'm opening it up to any discussion. We can start on the topic of barriers if we would like to start there. Yes?
I would like to see the inventory of city-owned properties looked into and some of those put into affordable housing. Because I'm looking at the list that we have and it's not attractive.
What do you mean by non-attractive?
There are small lots.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
Then you can't, you can build a single family
more
on
like
them, but that's.
Barriers to them.
So that's what you want.
But I'd like to see bigger parcels where a developer can build more units. And if they're available from the city, then you can implement some caveats that you mentioned, like, they have to have, efficiency, things like that.
But we're starting to purchase lots that are contiguous with that intent, right, Denise? Every now and then we have meetings where we're purchasing 2 or 3 together, or Chuck wants us to purchase one that connects to 2 with that in mind.
Yeah, it's opportunistic, right? So if we see an affordable housing property and there's an opportunity to acquire them at a financially advantageous way, then yeah, we can do that, or strategic. There are some larger parcels. One is, I'm not sure if the RFP has closed, but out on South MLK, as an example, near Woodlawn Avenue, was one that was just advertised for multifamily development. Very difficult to come by, so a lot of them come by, there's some other foreclosure action or escheatment or something like that, but as you may be aware, as you most certainly are aware, in this marketplace, investors are buying those up, and they very rarely fall into our hands for those purposes. They're bought at auction, what have you.
But if someone could evaluate the existing city-owned properties and maybe find use for affordable housing in them.
We do look at that every year. We're required to do that, to review that list every single year and propose that slate of available properties to council for consideration, and they're placed on the affordable housing inventory list. And a few years ago in charter, created the ability to sell at below market value or donate properties of less than 5 acres. And that was a shift from, I believe it was either a half or a full acre that was previously available to us. So we increased the acreage amount so that we could hopefully and potentially have larger assemblages of property that we could sell at a very discounted or donate for affordable housing purposes. So there is the intention for that. I would suggest that the opportunities are pretty limited in this market.
Could we, on that list that's Clearwater available properties, include some of the county properties? Because we have so many little pockets of county land within what we think of as all of Clearwater unincorporated. Could we include some of those? Because, for example, I think it was Mike Gelazzo asked about, do you have any property up there in the Clearwater area for a tiny home project for domestic violence survivors with PERC and stuff? And I said, there was one, a corner lot somewhere off south of MLK, but I knew for sure it was probably county unincorporated, but it's there like in our community-ish. I consider it our community, but it's just not incorporated. But, I don't know where you draw your boundaries for that, but would that help a developer? Like if you go to our website and you're like, what's available in Clearwater? And it's just incorporated when we have a lot of unincorporated pockets.
Yeah, but if it's land that sits in unincorporated Pinellas County, then the incentives of the city for
Right,
affordable
it's
housing
not,
don't
but it's
apply,
just-
right?
it's just
Yeah.
not-
Okay.
It's there. If
Yeah.
it's
Perhaps
more
it's-
problematic, then
Well, I'm just wondering, an alternative to that, perhaps where we have the affordable housing inventory list, we provide a link to Pinellas counties.
that's fine.
Yeah.
That sounds fine. Yep,
Well, yeah.
yep. I mean, with that.
I think to your point, if you're looking at it from a developer's standpoint, it would be most helpful to have an entire county map that has all the information.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
depending on the piece of land that they hover over, it would say this, go to the city of Clearwater for this one, go to
Yes.
the city of Largo for this one,
Yes.
go to Pinellas County for this one. Yeah.
Is that available?
I would suggest that maybe the Pinellas County, the housing compact, as you know, Vice Mayor Beckman and some of you others.
It's right here.
So, and forgive me, I've not been directly engaged in that process. I'm not sure that they've convened recently to begin to address some of the premises or principles within that compact, but I would suggest that would probably be the place where a map such as you're describing countywide that would include all of those available properties. I would think that that's sort of the group that would create that or drive that discussion, because that would certainly fit under the purview of what's
Yeah.
intended in the housing compact.
Okay, so we need to get back to barriers and incentives, right, Amanda? I know, we have all sorts of ideas. So you're basically asking if there's any barriers that we wanted to add to the list you already had?
Yeah, I think for this, what we're looking at is for the most emergent barriers. So perhaps barriers that have come up between last year's AHAC committee formation and this year's. I know not everybody may have been on last year's committee, but is there anything that happened over the last year that is suddenly an emerging barrier that may not have been considered or captured in the previous iteration?
I have a question about whether or not, people have brought up recently, just because the crisis is so acute, the idea of, I'm going to call them like rooming houses or like a fraternity house where you have multiple people living in a home. What's that possibility in our city? Do we have that? Do we have barriers that prevent, a fraternity house set up for affordable living in Countryside or in Skycrest?
Are you referring to co-housing or something of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, is that what you call it? Yeah. Roommates, shared living spaces?
We do not allow for rooming houses. That's kind of the old-fashioned term, I guess. Maybe it would be more like co-housing would be a more modern term, where it's more like dorm living,
Yeah.
shared facilities.
Right.
We do not have a definition for that, but it definitely would not be allowed like in the low, medium density neighborhoods. And I'd have to think about it to see how it might be permitted in our multifamily Because those are more like considered residential equivalent uses by the countywide rules, depending on whether you have a full living unit or not. So I think to allow something like that, we'd probably need to make some code amendments.
Well, do you think that's something to be considered? Is that a valuable thing to think about?
I think there's definitely value for it. It is something that you find in bigger cities where, maybe you're having a blend of older people that want to live and, not have all that maintenance and all, and this could be affordable. I don't know if we do have any local examples of that being built.
There's not many, and if they are, they're not necessarily accommodated directly by
Right.
a code. So it's more of trying to fit it into an
Right.
existing code rather than having a code that incentivizes or encourages that.
There was in St. Pete, there was an article in the Tampa Bay Times a couple of years ago about kind
I was
of
going to say, they
young
might
urban
have,
professionals.
there might be one or two. I think it's still pretty new.
Mhm.
And to know whether or not they're really working. And I don't know if people have done them here for, like affordable housing, or just more of an alternative way for like young professionals to live.
It may be, but I think, again, a mixed age housing in that sort of a configuration can be good as well, because our elderly are the greatest increasing population of homeless. Kevin, right?
Yes.
Huge, isn't it 800%?
I don't know what it is. Last year it was 200%, so it's probably even more this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's ginormous. And so if you could have, a young, single, parent working there, living there, and then an elderly, again, mixed age. I think we need to look at everything. And I remember walking in the countryside community, and there were less than 5 that I encountered, but some group homes that were there in countryside, and you would never know it. I just knocked on the door, was campaigning, and here it was, and it absolutely blends in. But, you have 3 or 4 people living in that home with some kind of a supervisor. But we need to see more of that, I think, throughout the city.
So I guess my question in response to what you're talking about is, would any of our ordinances prevent somebody like a senior citizen who owns a house with 3 bedrooms from renting out 2 of their bedrooms to somebody else?
And that's like that Pinellas County home share, really,
Yeah.
but
No, we do have some limitations through a HUD settlement that we had about having, locks, and if they're living together as really a housekeeping unit, that's totally fine. People can rent, out.
They probably do it.
Yeah,
We wouldn't even know if
Yeah.
they did or didn't, yeah.
It's not a.
So it's not a barrier per se, because it's not something that our ordinances or code basically prevents. Now, this brings up a good point that might be a barrier that we haven't thought about in previous years, but we may have, homeowners that used to do that, or would do that, but now turn to Airbnb or short-term rentals, and that's a barrier, because if, instead of a room or an ADU going to somebody who lives here and works here, it may go to somebody who comes to visit. So that may be a barrier we may want to add, rental, what are they called?
Short-term rentals.
Short-term rentals,
that's tough with the state.
yeah. Another barrier I don't see on here, and I think is always going to be a barrier, is the current state of the economy. I mean, there's not much that we can do about it, but it's something that I think we need to mention. It goes with the cost of production, obviously, but also the land availability.
And
Because
financing.
if we can't get those pieces of land, it's definitely going to make it harder. Anything else on the barrier side that we're not
As far as
mentioning?
programs, would this go into your down payment assistance program or anything? So my only mention, and I think I mentioned it last year, is the length of time it takes to process a DPA loan is too long to meet what a seller will accept for a contract. And then the biggest issue I've seen for years is the HQS inspections. The time of when that inspection comes is killing a lot of these transactions, even if we can get them accepted. So it's very hard. I mean, I used to, Robin, I used to use with clients so many of the down payment assistance programs, and in the last 2 years, I've maybe closed 2. Because it is just.
And I haven't closed one in the city of Clearwater in probably more than 2 years.
So tell me what the problem is, what's,
Well, first of all, the problem is nobody can find something they can afford in the city of Clearwater. Same with the city of Largo. I mean, I haven't done city of Largo. The only down payment assistance pretty much that I've done is the city of St. Petersburg. So it's very difficult to find something that's affordable, that they want to live in, that'll pass the inspection.
Yeah, or that they can get under contract
Or
with.
that they can get under contract where it can allow for at least 60 days to close.
Yeah, so the closing time would kill any down payment assistance contract. So we're lucky to be able to do a 30-day close and get, just any buyer's contract accepted. So when we have to do 45 or 60 days, it does not work. So it's almost, probably it's more, it takes more work ahead of time, but it probably needs to go back to like when Tampa Bay CDC, now Suncoast Housing, when they used to pre-approve the down payment assistance loan before the person found the home. And I know that means they have to do more work upfront, but if we can't even use the program because we have to wait the 45 to 60 days to get approval, the program's not being used. And then the HQS inspections, when I worked for the city, we kind of started those because we had some cases where we felt it needed them. Right now, the HQS comes, sometimes the week of closing, the week before, and it is absolutely impossible to get repairs done at that point. And then the repairs that the HQS is really you need to go just off of a 4-point. 4-point is what makes the home insurable, and that's done by their home inspector at the very beginning. HQS is coming in as housing quality standards, but I hate to say, we're nitpicking.
It's Section 8 standards.
Yeah, so it's Section 8 standards for, like a rental housing. So we are at a difference because we're going to purchase a home. So there are going to be things that a homeowner needs to be prepared to take on. But, I mean, we're losing contracts because of simple things, screen being torn, or I had an HQS where they flagged the refrigerator because it had like a little rust at the bottom, and it failed, which doesn't make any sense. So now we're making it even harder for them to get into a home. If the home's insurable, the 4 points of the home are covered with insurance, and the roof, AC, electrical, plumbing, then we go down to those other housing quality standards. I think it's too much, and it makes it impossible.
Denise, is this a conversation?
Would you like to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Come on up. Pat's going to yell at you.
Hello, I'm Terry Malcolm Smith, housing coordinator. The HQS is a HUD requirement, so it's not something that we can say, no, move ahead with a 4-point. We have to follow HUD guidelines.
City of St. Petersburg doesn't do it.
Nope.
And City of St. Petersburg doesn't do the HQS.
I'm not sure what funding source City of St. Petersburg
They use both ship and home.
Okay, and we more so use home, and we try to follow the guidelines. We're having a meeting, when is it, next month with HUD? We can ask this question, is it really necessary? Is it a guideline? Can we move away from it? But as of now, we try to follow
Or
their
perhaps,
guidance.
if you can't move away from it, do it much earlier in the process, because when a contract is written, when a real estate contract is written, it is written with a certain period of time for inspections. Now, again, a lot of times that's much shorter than it had been in the past. But if you can say to somebody, these people are getting down payment assistance, they need 10 days to get their inspection done. Perhaps the city can go out within those 10 days. And now you're not waiting until the 40th day to say they can't buy this house.
And that's,
Yeah, I totally agree with your recommendation, Robin, and I will forward this to the folks that we partner with to do the down payment assistance. Once the client is income eligible, and you have an appraisal, yeah, reach out to us and say, can we move forward with getting the housing quality inspection?
Even appraisals,
Appraisals
though,
not
are taking 2 to 3 weeks. So now you're already 3 weeks into the process and you're past the inspection period. There's a difference between the inspection period and the appraisal period. So you have the inspection period where the buyer can say, it didn't pass my inspection, I'm out, and nobody loses anything. But if the appraisal, there's also an appraisal contingency, which is different than the inspection period.
The issue we run into without getting an appraisal is that if the appraisal comes in much higher than what the client can afford, then it's not a deal. So we have spent money.
Much higher?
I'm sorry, if the appraisal comes in higher
Yeah,
than what a client can,
but you have a purchase price.
Yeah, appraisal, if it would come in lower, it kills.
It's where it comes in lower that it kills the
The
deal.
appraisal doesn't.
The only person who knows the appraised value is your lender and the buyer. The seller doesn't know the appraised value. Obviously, the down payment assistance program knows the appraised value, but if the appraised value comes in higher than the purchase price, it does not kill the deal.
well, we also have to look at the guidelines. For example, the federal government states that you cannot assist someone that's buying a house for more than $270,000.
They're not.
They're-
So the appraisal doesn't affect the purchase price of the
Correct.
home. But the appraisal, so you set a contract, and this is what they're purchasing the home for. This is the inspection period, like she said. So it's basically the city's timeline, city government and down payment assistance timeline don't match real-world timeline of a real estate contract. In a real estate contract, you get 7 to 10 days for a home inspection. They can cancel the contract for any reason in those 7 to 10 days by having a home inspection. So that's when the HQS should come in. Then the appraisal's ordered after that. Appraisal doesn't affect the appraisal is the value of the home, but it doesn't affect the purchase price of the home. So I see what you're saying. You have the standard, they can't purchase the home for more than what the value is, but the value never goes back to the seller. We've already negotiated that price. This is the purchase price of the home. The appraisal is more for the bank to say, this home needs to meet that purchase price. And then for you guys, you're looking at the appraisal, and when the appraisal comes in, I actually don't know, if anything, they're just having equity. Now the buyer's buying the home and they have equity and value in the home. It doesn't change the amount that they're purchasing the home.
Yeah, Lindsay, we probably need to talk
Yeah.
one-on-one because what I've seen is something different from what you're
We're
saying.
talking, okay.
But yeah, we can work this out. We can work with, again, the partners that do the processing and kind of see what challenges you guys are facing and try to address those challenges.
Yeah.
But again, HUD guidelines is superior to whatever we do, and we have to make sure we adhere
Yeah,
to
and I
those.
wonder if when you talk to HUD, what inspection they're requiring. Because when I worked for the city, the HQS, we were just kind of starting out, we didn't have it before. And so HQS became an easy inspection to do, because it was already happening with affordable housing rental programs, so that's what we did. I don't know if the HQS is the actual required inspection.
So-
The HUD, it might just be the.
That's what's required.
But I will tell you that I work with not just down payment assistance programs in Pinellas County, but also in every county in this area, in Tampa Bay. And Manatee County does an HQS, Clearwater, Largo, Pinellas County all do HQS. Pasco does not, Hillsborough doesn't have one, City of Tampa does, and they don't do an HQS either. City of St. Petersburg takes a copy of the home inspection and goes through the home inspection. And anything that's on the home inspection must be fixed before closing.
And Robin, again, we will reach out. We
Yeah.
have a really receptive person at HUD right now that is our lead that we can reach out to. We will definitely pose this question to that person and see what kind of feedback. And I'll definitely forward that to you guys if the housing quality inspection is absolutely needed, or if we can use the 4-point that the buyer gets before purchasing the property.
Can I ask, is this a staffing challenge with the city? Is it,
It's
No.
not,
has
it's not a
nothing to do with our
challenge.
city employees that have this on their plate to do the HVAC?
No,
and
because
all
we,
that?
we contract that.
Contract it out. But when you contract it out, you could pay a little more and say, I want it done in 3 days. or I want it done, it needs to be done in 2
Well,
days.
it's done quickly from the time it's ordered. The question is, when is it ordered?
I don't mean to interrupt the conversation, but I think this is a conversation that needs to happen at the
Yes.
NAHAB
Okay.
specifically and not in this
Okay.
meeting. So if we can just make a note that we want to have this conversation next time the NAHAB meets, that would be great, because I think this is a conversation that we need to have, but that is outside of what we're working on currently.
So maybe we just add it as a barrier. It's a barrier. So
Absolutely.
Put a point there that is added into the barrier.
Absolutely.
And then we discuss it later.
How about we put HUD regulations, maybe as a barrier?
Yeah.
Well, because it could be a broad bucket.
Right. Well, and it's already in there. I mean, it's code/regulations is already in there, and that's what we're discussing, so.
And I spoke with Chuck about this, I don't know if he had mentioned it to Amanda, but one of the barriers that we were experiencing in our office is insurance, homeowners insurance,
Right.
especially for the elderly folks.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's a.
Yeah, if it's not on here, we definitely want to add it.
Thank you, Terry.
Okay, so insurance, and I think we said a few other things.
Yeah, insurance will definitely become a major barrier as carriers are.
Yes.
Do we have any other barriers that we wanted to add at this time?
Homeowner taxes. Homeowner insurance taxes. But I don't know if that's.
Property insurance?
Property and tax, yeah.
Typically, the first year is normal, but then the second year.
That's because of values.
Right, right. Okay, I think that's it for barriers.
So those are all very good barriers and all very emergent, I think, in terms of coming up. Now, in terms of incentives, any incentives that have come to mind or things that you see as areas for improvement, either in terms of process or regulation? Doesn't necessarily have to be the converse of the barriers we just talked about. It could just be any incentive that's come to mind since last year that you thought, oh, this could be improved or this could be offered and it would really encourage people.
I think with the Inflation Reduction Act, when we have a lever about reducing the cost of living for people in affordable housing, there are all sorts of incentives that are coming to help reduce living costs for everybody at every income level. So I think, we need to get informed about those and advocate for those. Those are tools that, single-family home developers as well as developers can take advantage of to lower the cost of living for people.
Would that fall under any of the ones that are already listed, or would we have to create another bullet point?
I would just put new legislation, I guess,
I think there's several different places we could work that in. It's not something that the city would control directly, but it could be a matter of coordination or evaluating or providing information about. So we can definitely look into that. I'll make a note to see where that would fit in or could fit in.
partnering with knowledge, right, sharing that
Right,
knowledge.
right.
That may be a communication and marketing of affordable housing initiative, is that what you're
Yeah.
thinking? Or are you thinking something more specific to the act itself?
Ideally, I'd like to see any developer take advantage of anything that's available, not be ignorant because not only does it reduce costs, it reduces pollution and carbon emissions and all that stuff for all of us to benefit, whatever kind of building you're building.
Yeah, and I think the question is, because it's not something that the city controls, but it's more about, assistance with, maybe that's how we should word it, assistance with existing,
Incentives, national, federal
Right,
incentives or
right.
something. Promoting use yeah. Almost rewarding, use of those.
And is anything else in the incentives that you don't see listed that you'd like to add?
Well, there was the Hometown Heroes Housing Assistance Program passed by the state earlier this year. That's a new thing that to incorporate that into our thinking might be helpful.
Yeah.
else come to mind for an incentive?
I think when we, speaking of the Hometown Heroes, I think when we have those incentives at the state level, that we need to make sure that, that affects our tax base, right? And so that we need to make sure that we get some money back from the state to make up for that. I mean, absolutely, I'm in favor of, rewarding and acknowledging hometown heroes, Publix workers, CNAs, everybody who comes to work in those, and does the daily grind. But when you start giving those incentives, cities don't have as much money to work with. And so the state needs to pony up some more money to make it, make us whole, or help us out.
So I think if we add that assistance with other existing incentives,
Or
I think
other
they'll,
programs and other incentives.
I think they'll incorporate everything.
It's
I think advocating at the state, level, I mean, we need to all be on.
I would suggest, we're in the process of assembling our legislative priorities for state and federal. I would suggest that that's something that the NAHAB may wish to take action on in terms of establishing those legislative priorities or making recommendation to council as it relates to those legislative priorities.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll bring it up. Just the one thing I want to bring up is the first incentive area is the expedited review process. Is that, since we just had this conversation about DPA assistance and how that particular process basically hinders some of the other processes we have in place, would you recommend that we put that as a separate item, since it's not technically just a review process, it's really, working to get all of these programs working together and actually, effectively working? Because if we have that money saved for down payment assistance, but nobody can process a down payment assistance, what's the point?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a place to incorporate it. I think the balance of that is some of those issues we can control and some we
Right.
can't, in terms of City of Clearwater being able to resolve it. So I think perhaps the recommendation in there, which we can discuss further at the next meeting, may be along the lines of looking into that issue further and further promoting how that can be expedited and how that can be coordinated, and rather than actually at this juncture coming up with a specific resolution. I think there's more discussion that needs to happen in terms to figure out how that process can be improved and whose responsibility is for that ultimate action. So if I'm saying that correctly, what I'm trying to get at is, I think from the committee's recommendation, it's more of an investigating at this stage what the appropriate response or solution would be. I know which specific section you're talking about, so I do think that would be a good place to put it in terms of process. So we can definitely look at that. So at our next meeting, and I don't want to take us away from the incentives topic, but at our next meeting, we'll be looking at each of the recommendation or incentive areas and the associated recommendations. We'll be going one by one.
Okay.
And having that evaluation of, do we keep it, do we revise it, do we add to it?
Okay.
So that's what the next step will be. So for your homework between now and I'll get to this with the slide as well, it'll give you more time to kind of read through those recommendations and then look at where are opportunities to address some of the things we've talked about today.
And if we don't find a place to discuss the particular issue we had earlier, we can always add it in an incentive area next meeting, correct?
Correct. And so there's the statutory incentive areas, but then there's also committee-initiated incentive areas. If it does not fit under a statutory incentive areas, we always have the option of incorporating it into that committee.
Okay, perfect.
Initiated. And
So we'll table that until next meeting, if that's okay with the committee. Okay.
Any other incentives before we move on? Of incentive areas.
As we're just talking these incentives, and this may be something we want to table for NAHAB rather than this committee, but how effective are our incentives? Are we making an impact by having these incentives? I don't know that this is a conversation for this committee, but I think it's a conversation we should have. The incentives there, how can we make the incentive more effective?
Agreed. The measuring the effectiveness of the incentives we have in place. I agree with that.
And I had a brief conversation with Chuck about about the timeline. You know, the timeline on these earlier pages, well, I think I sent an email about the presentation from the Florida Housing Coalition about Affordable Housing Advisory Committee Orientation Part 1. And, you know, they have a suggested timeline on here that has, you know, it's sort of similar to ours, but it has some more, it looks like opportunities for public engagement. And so they designate staff and select AHAC members January through June and July through October, complete draft report, schedule and advertise public hearing, all that stuff that looks like we're kind of starting now, which is, you know, mid-ish September. But I said, you know, they're starting way earlier, why didn't we start earlier? And he said, well, you know, you can make it, you can do away with a NAHAB and just have it AHAC all along. And if we had it AHAC all along, you know, we'd have more people, especially the developers and you all, that I think enriches it. I don't know what the pros and cons are of having an AHAC that would meet year-round, which is like this AHAC timeline that's from the state level. So it might be something to think about, because I don't think the NAHAB's meeting until January. I think your meetings are taken away with AHAC stuff.
Not necessarily. I think
No?
if we have
Are you
something on
meeting?
the agenda, we would still have it. We would just have
Okay.
it after this meeting, yeah.
Okay.
And is that something, to answer your question, is that something that the NAHAB could discuss, of the possibility of having the AHAC year-round instead of, or as part of?
We certainly can discuss it. I would suggest to you that the AHAC is statutorily defined,
Okay.
and the NAHAB's role is different than the
Right.
AHAC. So the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee is narrowly defined for the purpose of the Local Housing Incentive Strategy. Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board deals with the consolidated plan and numerous other activities that are not within the purview of the AHAC. So I don't know that it's, whether the AHAC is a year-round committee, I don't believe that it would eliminate the NAHAB.
Right.
Okay, or take place.
Because of
Take place.
the mission of both
Yes.
both committees
Right.
or boards.
The other thing I had a question about was, you know, for our calendar, so we have, you know, we have the November 8th, AHAC holds a public hearing to approve updated LHIS report, and then the city council holds a public hearing to approve the LHIS report and submit to Florida Housing, whatever, Finance Court, Finance, thank you. But, you know, one thing I have philosophically is the timing of these meetings. Are we really giving ourselves an opportunity to hear from the public and allow that public input to shape what goes in that report? Is there enough time, or is it just, this is our report, I'll listen to any comments you have, but we don't have time capacity to alter it or come together and have these rich discussions?
It's a good point, and it's a point that I think about a lot when we meet at the NAHAB, because very often when we meet, we have a completely empty room, and when it comes to public comment, because it's a Tuesday at 9:00, nobody is here to comment.
Yeah.
I think it's a fair conversation to have. I don't know that this is the place or time to have it, but I think it's a fair conversation to have, especially because it affects the residents, to say, is it something that we need to, is it something that we can even move to a specific, or a time that would be more appropriate, or a date that would be more appropriate, or even if it's just once every quarter, so that we can still have, you know, different times or different days that may work better for public sessions. And in general, I feel like that's how the city does it when we have, you know, multiple iterations of a public forum or a public meeting that are being held in different neighborhoods and at different times, so that people have multiple opportunities to attend. I think because of the rules of this, it's just how we have to do it, but I may be
Well,
wrong.
the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee does not require public engagement. You all chose last year, and we're continuing it this year, to have a public comment opportunity during the meetings. But the state does not require public engagement in the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, but for the discussion that occurs at council in December. So certainly, we're encouraging it, you all supported it, and it remains a part of our agenda to have public comment. NAHAB, on the other hand, does require that. As you've said, Camille, it's very difficult to have people show up and provide input, or quite frankly, to even understand the foreign language that we're often discussing. For many, it's not there are ongoing discussions, and it's kind of difficult, I think, to insert yourself in some of those if you're not intimately familiar with kind of all of those things that we deal with on a daily basis. Whether that means, you all are wanting to move the NAHAB or even the AHAC, since we are allowing public engagement, to a different time of day or different day of week, we can certainly discuss that. Obviously, it will have to be in consultation with the Official Records Legislative Services and our public communications departments that produces the meetings, to make sure that, we can comply with all the requirements associated with that. Not suggesting that we couldn't do it, it just may take a bit to figure it out, if you choose to do it that way.
I don't know how the entire committee feels about this, and so I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone. So I would rather hear what the committee thinks so that we can either table this. I mean, at the end of the day, we have the way that, the NAHAB meets monthly, and then the AHAC starting in September through December. We could also bring that up for the next iteration of the AHAC, so as not to disturb what's already going on and already on the calendar. But I think it's definitely something that we want to discuss further.
And then as we're finishing up this meeting, do you think it's valuable to have people on this board, look through the consolidated plan, because that's what we operate off of?
So the consolidated plan, if you're referring to the consolidated plan for CDBG and home, is specific to the federal grant program. The AHAC is specific to the state SHIP program, so it's a little bit different in terms of how those programs are administered, and also the available and eligible activities under each of those programs. They're similar, but different. So the consolidated plan really doesn't govern this particular process. This particular process is limited to the local housing incentive strategy and the LHAP under SHIP. But in terms of relationship to affordable housing, yes, there's a large consolidated plan process that involves greater public input, I think, than this process, that documents the input that was received through that, which relates to affordable housing. So, yes, is it beneficial maybe to look at the consolidated plan and the information that was collected during that 5-year cycle? That probably would be beneficial, but it's not critical to this particular process in terms of what's required of the LHIS and LHAP.
I think just with those facts and stats and the overview of the situation that we're in within that, when it was first reported, is important to understand the crisis that we're in.
So we can send a link and reference those pages where the data is available, if that would be helpful to provide some context for what you're all, it is now a little bit outdated in this crazy world. It was published in, I believe, late 2019?
2020.
2020?
2020, but I think the process was in 2019 and then it went into effect.
Okay, so pre-COVID and perhaps pre-crazy market.
Right.
But, so some of that, maybe a little bit outdated, of course, but
But the numbers aren't any better.
the numbers are not any
If
better.
anything, they're not.
So we can provide that link, and I'll reference the pages, or have Chuck reference those pages where the data is.
And just to keep in mind that consolidated plan gets updated every 5 years, so, we're coming around to, in a couple years, actually, it's coming really fast, another consolidated plan cycle where that data will be recollected and updated. And now we have the 2020 census data, which provides more updated information, where I believe the previous iteration of the plan was looking back at American Community Survey data for the interim, so that real true census data wasn't available yet. So the next one may bring us up to a different place in terms of some of the information that's in there. So with that, I don't want to make everyone dizzy by going back to the slides, so. All right. So now we're in the recommendation phase. So everyone's handout, you've received the 2021 LHIS report. Your homework between now and the next meeting, which will be on October 11th, is to read the previous report, evaluate each recommendation, and then decide whether that recommendation should be continued, modified, or removed. And I know some of the discussion today was perhaps maybe adding some other incentive areas or recommendations as well. So at our next meeting, we'll discuss those as well as any new affordable housing incentives not addressed by the 2021 recommendations. Also between now and the next meeting, I'll put together a summary of everything that we talked about today and provide some options back to you in terms of where that might be worked into the recommendations for the next one. So again, our next meeting is October 11th. It'll be right here, so same place. And if you have any questions in the interim, please reach out to Chuck, or I know Denise as well, and they can assist you with any questions in the interim. Please be reminded that that November meeting, which is currently shown as November 8th in your materials, that's going to be November 7th, which will be the Monday, so the election day. So, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. It's a very important committee. Thank you for joining. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not done.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Do you want to make your comment first, or do you want me to invite people from the public to speak first?
I'd like to just ask for this.
Yeah.
I'd like to get some information for the next meeting.
The next AHAC meeting?
The next AHAC, and it actually could come from the other committee as well, okay? What I'd like to know is from 2017 to 2022, how many affordable housing units have we built and or created and or completed in our area, in Clearwater,
So
since 2017?
there is produced and there is preserved under land use restriction through our NAHAB, or through our rehab process or otherwise. Are you looking for all of those?
All of them. How many affordable units, housing units have we created since 2017?
Are we making an impact, in other words?
Yes, because how many do we anticipate that we need? Does anybody know that answer? Because I think we need to find out, what are we doing? What are we accomplishing? How many people are we taking care of? Because are we doing it the right way? Maybe we need to come at this problem from a different aspect. Maybe we need to say, we need this many. And then let's put a plan together to get that many. And then maybe we start to get some headway on this. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying, let's get some statistics and look at it, and maybe we can make some decisions based on hard facts. Could we get those numbers, please?
So yes, we can get those numbers.
Thank you.
The other part of what you'd like to achieve, I can't.
I understand, but if we have the numbers, we can
Consensus
compare.
on how that gets accomplished, but be happy to provide those numbers.
Thank you, Denise.
And I think if I'm not mistaken, that may be a conversation for the NAHAB
And maybe, it may
and
be.
not for the AHAC because of the mission of both
Right.
committees, but it's good to bring up. Before we move on from item 2.1, does anyone from the public wish to speak to this particular item? Please come on up, and you will have 3 minutes. Make sure you spell your last name for the clerk, please.
Hi, I'm Brian Beckman. I live in Clearwater, last name Beckman. Here with the Sierra Club here today, I just wanted to highlight a couple of specific points that I heard talked about earlier when it came to energy and reducing the cost of living in a home, or whether you own it or whether you rent it. And there are two specific goals in Greenprint that relate directly to energy and affordable housing. One of them is related to installing solar on 1,000 homes by 2030 on affordable low-income homes. And the second is a 20% reduction in energy costs in low-income housing. Now, to my understanding, that would apply to both existing homes as well as to new homes to be considered as far as what your committee here is considering. And then specifically related to incentives, I'd like to emphasize what I heard discussed here earlier was concentrated a bit on the Inflation Reduction Act, which is great. There are specific provisions in that deal directly with affordable housing, not just for anybody, but specifically for affordable housing to reduce those costs. What I'd ask your committee to consider is pairing with those specific incentives to make them even more effective. So take an example of what Dunedin is doing. So they already offer up to, it's either 2,000 or I think it might be raised this year to 2,500 per home off of your solar installation. That's an example of that. That's on top of the federal incentive that just went up to 30% as far as the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's one example. You could be doing that in other areas as well if you wanted to make that even more attractive for whether it's a developer, for a multi-family dwelling, or whether it's a single-family home, or even for existing homes, is to pair that opportunity from the Inflation Reduction Act with a specific action that the city might entertain to make that even more attractive. So I just wanted to highlight that, both from a green perspective, that has this clear intersection with this committee here, but also potentially pairing up those incentives like some of the other cities are doing as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wishing to speak on this item? Okay, great. We are moving on to item number 3, citizens to be heard regarding items not on the agenda. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on an item not on today's agenda? Okay, seeing no one come forward, I'd like to ask Denise Anderson if she has anything else to report to the committee.
Not really. Thank you. Amanda covered all of that. The reason we can't meet here on Tuesday is not just that it's election day, but that this is a polling place. It's a little bit challenging. So I did want to make sure that we have a quorum for the November 8th. So nodding of the heads if people have had an opportunity. Gabby, I believe you had a conflict for, November 7th at 9 a.m. Anybody else having a challenge? No. Okay. Seeing really none. That's kind of, we're going to have the AHAC meeting first. Unlike previous years, we're going to hold the AHAC meeting first, followed by the NAHAB meeting, and we will have a NAHAB meeting for you members on November the 7th. We have some action items for that. All right, great. Thank you so much.
All right, any last thoughts from the committee?
I just have a request, maybe, if our consultant, if you could you maybe share with us AHAC recommendations from some surrounding municipalities, like maybe Orlando, St. Pete, Tampa? What are they looking at creatively? Just to have some context of.
I don't have that information off the top of my head, but what I can do between now and the next meeting is research what's published.
Yeah, and just link it and just share it via email?
Provide a sheet.
That'd be
summary
fantastic.
For you, and then that way you can see what other jurisdictions are doing.
Basically this, but theirs, right? Is
Yes,
that what you're
and see
looking at?
how creative are they being and what can we copy? Or modify or, make our own, yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely compile that for you and get that before the next meeting.
Fantastic, thank you.
Excellent. All right, our next AHAC meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October 11th, 2022 at 9 a.m. right here in Council Chambers. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.